December 29th, 1944. The sun had dropped below the jagged horizon of Mindoro, leaving the island in a darkness so complete it felt physical. The kind of darkness pilots feared. The kind of darkness bomber crews trusted with their lives. But on the western edge of McGuire Field, one aircraft waited that didn't fear the dark at all. Major Carroll C. Smith climbed the ladder into his P-61 Black Widow, the twin-engine giant painted in matte black from spinner tail. Even standing still, the aircraft seemed to absorb the light from the lanterns on the tarmac. In the rear cockpit, Lieutenant Philip Porter, his radar operator, ran gloved fingers across the SCR-720 radar set, an instrument so sensitive it could find a bomber hidden inside a cloud bank at 5 miles. Smith and Porter had flown together long enough to trust each other without words, and tonight, they would need that trust more than ever. Word had come in minutes earlier. A formation of Japanese bombers, more than a dozen, was skimming across the South China Sea toward American positions on Mindoro. They were flying low, slow, and completely invisible. No moon, no city lights, no horizon. The kind of conditions that had allowed Japanese bombers to slip past fighters for 3 years of war. Smith tightened his harness. The Black Widow's engines rumbled awake, sending vibrations up through the steel ladder, still clamped to the fuselage. Ground crews pulled it away, and the aircraft rolled forward into a darkness that swallowed its wingtips. Night fighters across the Pacific had heard the rumors. Some said the P-61 could see in the dark. Some said its radar could read the shape of a plane. But only a few men truly knew what the SCR-720 could do, and most of them were sitting inside this aircraft. Control cleared them for takeoff. Smith pushed the throttles forward. The Black Widow leapt down the runway, engines clawing at the air. Moments later, the wheels left the ground, and the lights of McGuire Field vanished beneath them. Ahead lay nothing but black sky, black sea, and 12 enemy bombers that believed darkness made them untouchable. Smith intended to prove them wrong. The moment McGuire Field disappeared behind them, the cockpit became a world of faint red lights and the low hum of electronics. Outside, there was nothing. No stars, no clouds, not even a faint outline of the horizon. Smith flew by instruments alone, the needles steady under his hands as the P-61 climbed toward its patrol altitude. In the rear cockpit, Lieutenant Philip Porter leaned toward the glowing green scope of the SCR-720. Most fighter pilots relied on eyes, instincts, and sunlight. Porter relied on a 5-inch circle of phosphor that shimmered with radio waves bouncing off metal miles away. The technology was revolutionary, temperamental, and, on nights like this, absolute magic. Porter adjusted the gain. A faint blip materialized on the outer ring, then faded. He fine-tuned again. This time, it held steady. "Contact," he said calmly through the intercom. "Single aircraft. Bearing 030. Range 4 miles. Slight altitude advantage." Smith felt the shift inside himself, the transition from blind flight to the hunt. Turning to 30, he answered, banking the aircraft into the night. The P-61 responded smoothly, its massive wings biting into invisible air. Porter watched the blip grow stronger. He's moving slow, probably a bomber, heading southwest. If he keeps that track, he'll pass right above the coastline. The irony never escaped them. Japanese crews believed night was protection. They had used darkness to terrorize airfields from the Solomons to New Guinea. But radar didn't care about moonlight. It didn't care about camouflage or altitude or deception. It only cared about metal, and the blip on Porter's screen was undeniably made of it. Smith leveled the aircraft. "Talk me in." Porter's voice became clinical, precise, his world reduced to bearings, distances, and closure rates. "Come left 5 degrees. Reduce speed." He's drifting to port. Range 2.8 miles and closing. The cockpit remained pitch black except for the dim glow of instruments. Smith couldn't see the bomber yet. He didn't expect to. Night fighters weren't hunters of light. They were hunters of radio echoes. 2 miles, Porter said. Altitude equal now. He has no idea we're here. This was the eerie part. The enemy was flying through the same sky, on the same trajectory, separated by only minutes of flight, but entirely unaware. Smith tightened his grip on the controls. For the first one, he said quietly, "Let's get close." Porter didn't argue. 1.5 miles. Closing fast. Somewhere ahead, invisible in the black, a Japanese bomber droned on. Its crew believed they were alone. In 60 seconds, they would discover the sky had eyes. The closer Smith flew, the quieter the cockpit seemed to become. Not because the engines softened, but because anticipation sharpened every nerve. Total darkness erased the usual cues. No shadows, no silhouettes, no faint glimmer off a canopy. Just blackness, as smooth and featureless as ink. But Porter's voice guided him with a confidence born from countless practice intercepts. 1 mile, coming slightly left. He's turning without knowing it. Enemy bombers often wandered at night. Unaware, their gentle adjustments created opportunities for hunters. 0.8 of a mile. Start descending 20 feet. Smith eased the yoke, the Black Widow shifting downward like a ghost sinking beneath a fog layer. 0.6. You should start to see exhaust if conditions are good. Conditions were not good. There was no moon, no reflection off the sea, just endless dark. 0.4, Porter murmured. He's right in front of us. Hold course. Smith squinted into the void. Nothing. He trusted Porter implicitly, but every nerve screamed at him. There is no plane. The human brain wasn't built for blind hunting. Then, faint as a cigarette ember, a tiny orange pinprick appeared ahead. Engine exhaust. Smith's pulse steadied. I've got him. The ember multiplied, becoming 2, then 3. Exhaust stacks glowing just enough to betray the bomber's existence. The aircraft was a twin-engine Ki 48, a workhorse of Japanese night raids. It flew slow, predictable, and utterly unaware of the predator rising behind it. Smith eased the throttles. He didn't want to overshoot. Porter confirmed, range point 2. Perfect position. He has no radar. No idea. Smith aligned the Black Widow's nose with the drifting shape ahead. Slowly, the bomber materialized, first as a blurred dark shape, then as a solid silhouette eclipsing the faint glow of its own exhaust. Smith waited a heartbeat longer. Then he squeezed the trigger. For 20mm cannons ripped open the night. Flame bursts briefly illuminating both aircraft like lightning. Tracers stitched across the Ki 48's fuselage. Sparks cascaded. A wing dipped violently. The bomber burst into flame, a sudden sunflower of orange against the void. It fell in a slow, spiraling arc toward the unseen ocean. Porter watched it disappear from radar. Splash 1. Smith exhaled once, steady. Find me another. The hunt was just beginning. The glow of the first bomber's fall had barely faded before darkness reclaimed everything. The sky snapped shut again. No horizon, no flame, no debris. Just black silence. Smith leveled the Black Widow, and Porter immediately went back to work, tuning the radar with delicate adjustments as if sculpting the night itself. Multiple returns, Porter said, leaning forward. 3, no, for aircraft. Spread out. Looks like a loose formation. The Japanese pilots weren't flying tight to cooperate. They flew loose because they believed darkness protected them better than discipline. Smith angled the aircraft northeast. Which one's closest? Porter tapped his scope. Far right element. Range about 5 miles. He's drifting off course, maybe correcting for wind. If we hit him first, the rest won't see a thing. Smith nodded. The irony was always the same. Radar made American night fighters more coordinated in the dark than many daylight formations. As the P-61 closed in, Porter issued clipped updates. For miles. 3.2. He's losing altitude. Might be setting up for approach. 2 miles. You're right on him. Keep speed steady. Smith adjusted ever so slightly, letting the bomber come to him. The Black Widow's throttles hummed under his fingers. 1 mile. Descend 20 feet. He's flying sloppy, probably tired. Japanese night crews often flew long, exhausting routes. The P-61 crews exploited that. Smith peered ahead. Nothing. No glow. No shadow. Just a strange sensation of chasing a ghost he couldn't see. Half-mile, Porter said. He's right ahead. You're closing perfectly. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the bomber emerged as a smudge against the void. A key, 21, larger than the first target. Smith approached from below, invisible even if the crew had been scanning. Porter whispered, 2 tenths. Whenever you're ready. Smith inched closer. A few exhaust flickers confirmed the target. He fired a short burst. Cannon fire tore upward, catching the bomber across its belly. One engine flared, then failed. The aircraft lurched, trailing fire. The second burst hit home. The key, 21, rolled onto its back, then dropped straight down like a dying star. Porter checked his scope. He's gone. That's 2. Smith pulled up gently, the P-61 steady and patient. We're not finished. What about the others? Porter turned the dial again. Still out there, he said. Let's go collect them. The sea far below was invisible, an infinite well of darkness mirroring the sky. Flying low at night could make even veteran pilots nauseous. Without moonlight, the world had no up or down. The P-61 seemed to float in nothingness, suspended between 2 black oceans. Smith trusted the instruments. He trusted Porter more. 2 remaining contact from the original group, Porter said. But they've split. One's heading northwest, the other pushing south, probably searching for the coastline. Smith kept his voice calm. Give me the southern one. That's the easier one to lose, Porter warned. He keeps changing altitude. That's why we take him now. Smith rolled into a shallow turn, both engines humming in perfect rhythm. The P-61's black paint blended seamlessly into the night. Japanese spotters on the ground never knew it was there, not even when it passed overhead. Porter refined the radar sweep. Contact reacquired. 3 miles. He's alone. Unlike daylight interception, night fighting wasn't adrenaline and eyesight. It was mathematics, angles, and patience. Porter translated radar echoes into geometry. Smith converted geometry into attack position. 2.5, Porter said. Descending. He's hunting for landmarks. Probably thinks he's approaching Mindoro. Smith smirked. Let's make sure he doesn't find it. The P-61 drifted closer, climbing slightly to sit where no enemy gunner ever expected Americans to be, above and behind, silent and unseen. Range 1 mile, Porter said. He's speeding up. Maybe nervous. Smith squinted. Still nothing. The darkness tonight wasn't just heavy, it felt almost alive. Half mile. A faint glow appeared, flickering like a dying match. Exhaust. There he is. Smith eased the throttles back. The bomber's outline formed. A twin-engine L-2D transport converted for night bombing, flying low and slow like a shadow pretending to be brave. 0.3 miles, Porter murmured. Take him. Smith slid the sight ahead of the bomber and fired a carefully measured burst. The tracers vanished into the black, then reappeared as sparks erupting along the L-2DS fuselage. Flame blossomed from its port engine. The bomber pitched downward as if the sky had suddenly turned to liquid. It spiraled once, twice, then plunged beneath the horizon line Smith couldn't see but instinctively felt. Porter's scope cleared. That's 3. Smith banked away from the falling wreck, climbing back into the endless dark. 1 more, he said. We finish what they started. For a moment, the radar screen showed only the calm sweep of the scanning line. No blips, no echoes, just the quiet hum of the SCR-720 doing its invisible work. Smith leveled off at 9,000 feet, letting the P-61 settle into a smooth, predatory glide. Porter exhaled slowly. Last one's tricky. I had him, then he dropped off. Either he dove hard or he's masking behind terrain. Smith adjusted course. If he's diving, he's scared. Scared pilots make mistakes. Porter tuned the set again, using a narrower beam, more precise but harder to maintain. The seconds stretched. Darkness pressed in on both cockpits. The faint glow of the instruments painted Porter's face in ghostly red. Then, a tiny blip, so faint it looked like dust on the screen. Got him, Porter said. Low altitude, heading due west. Range 6 miles. He's hugging the sea to stay hidden. Smart, Smith murmured, but not smart enough. The P-61 descended steadily. The engines thrummed like distant thunder, smooth and controlled. The Black Widow was built for exactly this. Silent closing, slow tightening of the noose. 5 miles, Porter said. He's weaving. Not evasive, just lost. Probably trying to fix his position by dead reckoning. Smith smiled. Perfect. They dropped to 6,000 feet, then 5,000. The world outside was pitch black, indistinguishable sky and water merging into one vast emptiness. Only the instruments proved they weren't flying upside down. 3 miles, Porter announced. He's maintaining altitude. Course steady. The closing angle was perfect. Smith eased back the power, letting the bomber unknowingly fly into the trap. No lights. No silhouette. Not even exhaust glow yet. 2 miles. He still has no idea we're... Hold on. Porter leaned forward. He's dropping to 3,000. Fast. Smith frowned. Emergency descent, or he thinks he's close to target. Smith matched the descent carefully. The altimeter spun downward. Moisture thinly coated the cockpit glass. Sea haze rising into the night. 1 mile, Porter said. He's directly ahead. Slight right turn. Smith strained his eyes. Nothing. Half mile. He should be visible. Still nothing. Point 4. A sudden streak of orange flared far below. Engine exhaust brightening as the bomber throttled up. Smith locked on instantly. I see him. The Japanese pilot had made a fatal mistake, climbing just enough to expose the glow of his engine to the Black Widow behind him. Point 2, Porter whispered. Take him when ready. Smith nudged the sight ahead of the faint silhouette and fired. Tracers reached first. Cannon shells followed. The bomber jerked violently. Flames erupted across its wing. It rolled left, then right, struggling like a wounded animal. The final burst broke it apart. Fire rained toward the dark sea. Porter watched the scope go blank. That's 4, he said quietly. Smith banked away from the falling wreck, the P-61 rising back into the night it had mastered. Let's go home, he said. The sky's clean. As Smith turned the Black Widow back toward Mindoro, the night felt strangely heavier. Emptier now that every threat had been erased. The engines hummed their steady duet. The radar set cooled with a faint crackle, and for the first time in 80 minutes, neither man spoke. 4 kills in a single night run was unheard of in the Pacific. Smith knew it. Porter knew it. But the sky allowed no celebration. Then a voice broke through the headset, tight, anxious, almost breathless. Night Fighter 3-1. This is Mindoro Control. Report status. Smith answered calmly. 3-1 is green. 4 enemy bombers destroyed. Returning to base. Static hissed, then silence. Porter frowned. Why aren't they responding? Mindoro Control came back on, the controller's voice trembling. 3-1. Repeat last transmission. For 4 bombers. Smith confirmed. Affirmative. All verified. Returning. This time the controller didn't hide his reaction. My God, you just stopped the entire wave. As the P-61 closed on friendly territory, radio chatter exploded. Ground crews, radar stations, other night fighters, all reacting in real time as reports filtered in. The Japanese raid had been expected to cause catastrophic damage. They were coming for aircraft on the ground, fuel dumps, repair areas, anything to slow the American advance toward Luzon. But not a single bomber made it. Smith glanced back toward Porter. Even in the dim red glow, he could see the younger man processing what they'd just done. 4 kills wasn't just a victory. It was a tactical demonstration the entire theater had doubted was possible. Mindoro Control to 3-1. Another voice cut in, steadier but urgent. Be advised, General Kinney wants a full report on landing. Repeat, full report immediately. Smith raised an eyebrow. General George C. Kinney, the head of 5th Air Force, didn't personally request pilot debriefs unless something truly extraordinary had happened. "Copy," Smith said. As they approached McGuire Field, the coastline emerged as a faint, jagged outline, a darker shape against the slightly less dark sea. Searchlights swept lazily, even though no enemy bombers remained alive to fear them. The runway lamps came into view, a dim, dotted trail guiding them home. Porter finally spoke again. "Sir, I think we changed something tonight." Smith didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sky behind them already held the proof. 3-1 on final approach, Smith radioed. The Black Widow descended toward the faint lights below, carrying 2 men who had just rewritten the rules of night warfare. The 8 volunteers had trained for torpedo launches, depth charge evasion, and emergency sealing drills, not land missions. Every fiber of their Navy schooling insisted that submariners stayed underwater, unseen, untouchable. But as they crouched in the rubber boat, slicing through black surf toward the coast of Hokkaido, each man realized the truth. None of them belonged here, yet no one else could have done it. Cassidy rowed at the bow, glancing back at the coastline that grew sharper with each silent pull of the oars. "Feels wrong," he whispered. "Us on land." Zentgraf smirked. "Just pretend it's a really wet pier." No one laughed, not from fear, but from focus. The Japanese home islands were ahead of them. The only American boots that had ever touched that soil belonged to pilots dragged from the sky. And none of those men had escaped. The surf grew louder, too loud. The boat bottom scraped stone. "Beach," Johnson breathed. They were here. 8 silhouettes dragged the boat above the waterline, flipped it, and buried it in sand and kelp. The silence on shore was suffocating. Even the wind seemed careful not to touch them. Cassidy checked his watch. 40 minutes to the target. Quiet and quick. Flucky's orders were simple, brutal, and absurd. "Get in. Plant explosives. Destroy the train line. No casualties. Return unseen." But on the ground, with the distant smell of cooking fires drifting from a fishing village they couldn't see, simplicity felt like a lie. Every footstep could reveal them. Every mistake could condemn the submarine waiting offshore. They advanced in a brush so thick it muffled everything, even their own doubts. Moonlight dripped between branches. The cold bit their fingers. The weight of the explosive charge dug into their shoulders. Miles from the Barb, farther from safety than anyone in the U.S. Navy had ever been on the Japanese mainland, they finally spotted it. A thin, silver ribbon of rail cutting across a shallow embankment. Cassidy knelt. "That's the line." Zentgraf exhaled slowly. "Then let's make history, boys." And in the dark, beneath a foreign sky, 8 submariners prepared to do something no submarine crew had ever been asked to do. Fight a land war they were never supposed to touch. Cassidy motioned for the men to drop low as they crawled toward the rail embankment. Frost crackled under their boots, loud as rifle fire in the still night. Every breath felt dangerous. Every movement felt borrowed. Johnson unslung his pack and whispered, "Fuse length is 60 seconds. Once this thing's lit, we're ghosts." Cassidy nodded, but kept his eyes on the track. "Only if we move like ghosts. No second chances out here." The explosives. A modified scuttling charge designed for sinking ships, not derailing trains, looked absurdly small against the steel rails. But everyone understood the physics, pressure, timing angle, and above all, placement. Zentgraf slid the charge beneath the rail bed, fingers blackened with soil. "This'll do it," he murmured. "Train hits this at speed. Rails go one way, engine goes the other." Cassidy checked the horizon. Nothing. Just darkness and the occasional flicker from distant fishing huts. The men worked quickly, hand signals replacing words, fear replaced by precision. Then a sound, a faint, rhythmic clanking echoing across the cold air. Johnson stiffened. "Tell me that's not." Cassidy raised a fist. Silence. Everyone froze. The sound grew louder. Metal. Heavy. Approaching. A train. Of all the nights. Of all the windows in history. The Japanese freight line had chosen now to send a locomotive rumbling down the track. Zentgraf whispered furiously, "We're not ready. The fuse isn't." Cassidy sprang forward. "No time for textbook. We light it as soon as they pass. Extraction route immediately. Move." They flattened themselves beside the embankment as the ground trembled. Steam hissed. Iron shrieked. The locomotive roared past them, close enough that its heat brushed their cheeks. Johnson swallowed. Next train could be military. We hit that one. Cassidy stared at the charge buried beneath the track. At the empty blackness the train had come from. At the risk, the insanity, the razor-thin timing. He whispered, "Then we'd better pray the next one isn't early." A faint whistle echoed in the distance. Another train was coming. This was it, the moment that would decide whether the impossible mission became a footnote or a legend. Every man held his breath as the second train approached the carefully set charge. Cassidy double-checked the fuses, 60 seconds, as practiced. One hand pressed the detonator switch, the other steadying his balance on the embankment. The seconds stretched, each one a small eternity. Porter of the submarine team would have understood this tension, the rhythm of waiting for the right moment, the balance between patience and action. Cassidy didn't have luxury for hesitation. The train thundered closer, the pounding of its wheels on the rails echoing like distant artillery. Japanese soldiers leaned over crates, unaware that invisible eyes tracked every motion. Cassidy pressed the switch. A soft click. Nothing. The seconds ticked. Heartbeats synchronized to the pulse of the approaching train. 45 seconds. 30. 20. Each number carried the weight of the men's lives and the mission's success. Then, a sudden burst. The charge detonated. Steel rails shivered violently before lifting in a brilliant arc sparks, and shrapnel shot into the night sky. The locomotive bucked, twisted, and derailed, its wheels tearing into the embankment. Wooden flatbeds crumpled, scattering supplies, twisting metal, and clouds of smoke into the black void. Soldiers were thrown to the sides, scrambling, screaming. Fire erupted along the train's hull, licking the cold night air. The 8 men hit the dirt instinctively. Mud and debris rained around them. Cassidy felt the heat on his face, the roar in his ears, the smell of burning coal and twisted metal. Every second, every calculation, every bit of courage crystallized in this one impossible moment. As the train settled into chaos, the men didn't cheer. There was no time for triumph, no room for celebration. The enemy was still alive, still present, and the tide of danger had not ebbed. Every second counted as they retreated into the cover of trees, heading back toward the extraction point and the waiting Barb offshore. Johnson coughed through smoke, his eyes wide. We did it." Zentgraf didn't speak. He only glanced at the burning wreckage, calculating the next steps, the remaining dangers, and the path back. The fire illuminated the shoreline momentarily, giving a deadly spotlight to their escape route. Cassidy swallowed, steadying himself. "Good. Now we'll run." The night swallowed them again, the P-38s and the distant guns far behind. The Pacific Ocean waiting like a silent witness to the impossible victory of 8 men who had defied physics, tactics, and reason. The 8 men ran, bodies pressed low against the uneven terrain, hearts hammering in rhythm with every step. The embankment behind them still smoked, the wrecked train glowing faintly like a dying star in the darkness. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig could mean discovery, yet there was no time to pause or second-guess. Cassidy led the way, guiding them through the narrow paths they'd scouted during training. Johnson stumbled over exposed roots. Zentgraf grabbed his arm, pulling him forward without a word. Every movement was deliberate. Every sound could alert the enemy. The adrenaline sharpened their senses. Distant shouts of Japanese soldiers, the crack of splintered wood from the explosion, and the occasional distant gunfire from patrolling units reminded them that safety was still miles away. The beach came into view, faintly outlined against the dark waves. The Barb waited, Engines idle, ladders ready. The men pushed harder, lungs burning, knowing that the final stretch was often the most dangerous. One misstep could expose them to patrols or the cold surf. Zentgraf signaled, a single hand gesture, and the men split into small groups, converging on the water's edge silently. Cassidy, the last to approach, scanned the shoreline. Spotlights were absent tonight, but that did not mean the Japanese were unaware. The men entered the surf, letting the cold water shock their senses and mask their silhouettes against the night. The ladders lowered from the submarine just as the first sloshes of waves lapped against them. Cassidy grasped the rungs and pulled himself aboard, hoisting Johnson up after him. Zentgraf and the remaining men followed, each climbing with careful precision. Finally, all 8 were accounted for, soaked, exhausted, and alive. Flucky gave no verbal commendation. He only nodded sharply, the respect clear in his eyes. The mission's success was evident in the distant flames along the shore and in the relieved faces of the men who had just returned from near-certain death. The Barb slipped silently back beneath the waves. The Japanese forces, unaware of the full extent of the sabotage, would spend hours grappling with the destroyed rail line, while 8 men lay huddled below deck, their hearts still pounding with the echo of fire and steel. This night would later become a legend among submariners, not just for the destruction wrought, but for the sheer audacity of sending men trained for the sea to wage war on land against impossible odds. Dawn broke over the Pacific, pale and hesitant, as the Barb surfaced in calm waters far from the Japanese coast. The men emerged from below deck, faces streaked with seawater, sweat, and soot from the night's operation. For the first time, exhaustion overcame adrenaline. They were alive, but they knew the true measure of what they had accomplished would only be understood later, in reports, debriefs, and the lessons taught to every future submarine crew. Flucky gathered his crew and the 8 shore team members. There were no medals in the moment, no speeches, no cheers, just the quiet acknowledgement of what had been achieved. A single destroyed rail line, a derailment that crippled Japanese logistics, and the survival of men who should never have been there at all. The mission was audacious, reckless, and extraordinary, but it worked. Against all conventional wisdom, against all predicted failure rates, they had rewritten the limits of what a small team could accomplish in wartime. Reports sent back to Washington described a daring strike that defied doctrine. Submarine officers studied the planning and execution for years to come, dissecting every element: timing, stealth, coordination, and the courage to trust men in circumstances they were never trained for. Flucky's leadership became a case study in calculated risk and decisive command. The 8 men were hailed in whispers and formal commendations alike, not for individual heroism alone, but for showing that innovation, audacity, and precise execution could turn the tide in ways armies, fleets, and entire divisions could not. This mission became a touchstone in naval history, a lesson in daring, in improvisation, and in the power of small teams to accomplish what many thought impossible. As the Barb cruised back to friendly waters, the crew reflected on the night's events. The fire, the derailed train, the invisible dangers. They were more than a story. They were a testament to the blend of human ingenuity and courage that defined World War II. The Pacific had tested them, and they had responded not with fear, but with precision, skill, and the audacity to challenge the impossible. History would remember the mission as more than a raid. It was proof that in war, even a few determined individuals could alter the course of events, and that sometimes survival hinged not on overwhelming force, but on ingenuity, timing, and sheer human resolve.